Well, I just started, so here we go. What is up, Nets fans? Welcome to a live Brooklyn Buzz. I'm your host, Nick Fay. With me, as always, Jack Manuel. Jack, how are we doing today?
Nick's always starting premature, guys.
No, that's not the case. Jack just wasn't ready. No, he wasn't ready for it. But no, back to Nets talk, what we're focusing here on the Brooklyn Buzz. Obviously, there's storylines every single week. Kenny just had a great interview. Some little details came out about the Kevin Durant sign and trade and the contracts of Kyrie and KD. Before we get into it, though, quick reminder, check us out, iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, OTGBasketball.com, NetsRepublic.com, Dash Radio, YouTube, like I mentioned, Spotify coming soon. And then also be sure to subscribe on YouTube. Also leave those reviews on iTunes. 5 stars are much appreciated. But let's get into this, Jack.
Yeah, let's start off with the KD and Kyrie Irving contracts, Nick, because these are interesting. There seems to be some discernible differences. In terms of, we've touched on the sort of salary cap sort of wizardry that sort of had to be done to sort of get the money for DeAndre, sign Nicholas Claxton, and all the rest. But we'll go through it. So I think Kevin Durant seems the most, the simplest. He gets $1 million in yearly performance-based incentives to get the full max. So there are 4 of the incentives that make that list. So 1, Brooklyn makes the playoffs. 2, the Nets win 43 or more games. 3, he plays at least 50 regular season games. And 4, he makes the All-Star team. How likely are those things to happen, Nick? Are you surprised about the sort of finagling from the front office?
His seem really easy compared to Kyrie's. Obviously, we'll get to Kyrie's, but obviously he's not get them this year unless does he only have to get one of the 4? Or does he have to get all 4?
I believe it. He will get if any of them are met.
Yes, he's guaranteed to get his max because the Nets are going to make the playoffs every year he's under contract. So boom, there he gets his max.
He gets his mil, whereas Kyrie Irving's are split up a little bit differently. So he has 8 individual ones at $125,000 each, and they're as follows. I guess we'll go through them, and then you tell me how likely you think it is to happen.
Okay.
He plays in at least 70 regular season games.
I'd give that like a 50% chance. Like, I think he probably wants to play more games, but I think that the Nets will rest him a couple games regardless. So it's going to be up to him to pretty much not get hurt at all.
He's done that apparently 5 times already in his career. So that of what you will. He plays at least 60 regular season games and averages under 2.4 turnovers.
That's pretty tough. I'm going to give that like 33% chance.
He's only done that once, and he did that, I believe, last year. I think his career average is around 2.5, 2.6. He plays at least 60 regular season games and averages at least 4.6 free throw attempts.
What's his career average of free throws? It's probably like around 4, right?
He's done that 3 times across his career. He had 3.7 last season and averages 4.4 for his career.
Give me 33% on that one as well. Like, I think it's a possibility, but it's still like that's a pretty solid jump.
I mean, if that was the number for D'Angelo Russell, then oh boy, you'd almost rule it out. You have to rule it out. Kyrie Irving has to shoot 88.5% from the free throw line in the regular season.
I feel like that's like very likely. I know he might not have shot in that before, but I think it's not incredibly difficult to get your free throw percentage up if he's already a good free throw shooter. Give me 60%.
He's done it 3 times across his career, and he's averaged 87.3% last season. And for his career, he averages 1% less, 87.5. The next one, he averages at least 2.83 in the regular season.
Give me like 75% on that one because I think the Nets are going to encourage him to shoot more threes.
Yeah, I think that this one seems relatively likely. But he has only done it once, and he's averaged 2.1 his career. Did average 2.6 last season for Boston, so I think that's more of a higher indicator of things to happen. I think he's going to be given a bit more of a free rein, and he's an incredibly capable 3-point shooter. Probably, where would you rank him? I'll give you mine. Where would you rank him as like point guard 3-point shooters?
Yeah, I think we kind of mentioned on the last outlet he'd probably be top 5. Probably like 3 or 4. And I think also, just to throw in another fact, this year I think we'll have more shots created for him than he has in the past. Like last year on Boston, there's not really a ton of playmakers. Where if he plays where Spencer and Karras, there's a better chance that someone might set him up for an open three.
Yeah, I think it's a lot more likely. I think that's a pretty likely one, despite the fact that he has only done that once in his career. He averages 2.1. He averages under 2.1 fouls in the regular season.
That one seems like really hard to average under 2.1 fouls.
It's just a weird one as well.
Give me like 10% on that. I think the Nets want him to be better defensively, and I think sometimes being better defensively means you're more aggressive, so more likely to get fouls.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting one. I think with Caris, if he's obviously probably likely to be playing with Caris LeVert a lot, you might be able to hide Kyrie a little bit defensively. So I think it could be somewhat likely. For the record, he has done that 3 times in his career. He averages 2.2 fouls per game and averaged 2.5 the last season for the Celtics. Now, these last two relate more to the team specifically. So the Nets scored 114 points per 100 regular season possessions with Kyrie on the floor.
Give me that one at like 60 or 70% because we kind of talked about on the previous buzzes. I think there's going to be more of emphasis on transition offense, especially with a lot of the young wings. You have Rodions out there, Taurean Prince, Caris LeVert, guys that are athletes and get out and run. And I think that'll push the pace and push up the offense.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty decent number, 114 points per 100 possessions. For the record, according to Basketball Reference, he's done that 4 times. NBA.com only listed it once. But, yeah, I think you have an elite offensive team.
God bless you. First time I ever had to give you a God bless you on a buzz.
Man, it actually happened. There's bees buzzing around me. I'm getting some allergies. So that one I think is a little more likely because, you have an elite offensive team when you have an elite offensive player. So I think you add Kyrie Irving, I would love that number, honestly. So, and the final one, the 8th one, Brooklyn allows 106 points or fewer per 100 possessions on the defensive end with Irving on the floor.
I give that one like 33% because I think if we're saying the 114 offensive is probable, the Nets are more likely to allow like something like 108 or 109, for the opposing team.
I mean, if you literally have 114 offensive rating, 106 defensive rating, and you have a net rating of 8,
you're really good.
That's elite. That's like near Milwaukee Bucks regular season good. So, he deserves that money. He deserves probably a little bit more than $125,000 for that. Individually, according to Basketball Reference at NBA.com, he's had 2 defensive ratings of 106 or lower, according to Basketball Reference, and 3 times individually has he had 106 defensive ratings. So, I mean, taking all these into account, it seems like Kyrie will probably get about $500,000 or so. Do you think about half of them, Nick?
Yeah, I think about half. Like probably, maybe you could argue maybe 5 to 6. 2 of them he definitely won't get, but there's a good chance he could get a lot of them.
Yeah, definitely. Before we move on to the next topic, our boy Adrian Dyson, Joe Harris or Taurean Prince, who is starting at shooting guard?
That's really interesting. I mean, Taurean Prince, if he starts, won't be at shooting guard. It'll be at small forward. And I think this has kind of been what we've been flip-flopping in terms of starting lineup. Like the names that we have locked in are Kyrie Irving and Caris LeVert. And then, one of the centers obviously is going to start being DeAndre or Jared Allen. Then it gets interesting at like 3 and 4. Do you start Joe Harris? Do you start Taurean Prince? Does Rodion starts at the 4? Do you go with like a Harris and Prince, or do you go Prince and Rodion's? Like there's a lot of different combos there. It's kind of early to decide. I'm kind of leaning towards Prince in that situation because I like the idea of having like nice versatility defensively and then the real pop with the transition offense. And we know Joe can come off the bench and bring a really good surge. Like imagine just hypothetically if DeAndre starts, you bring Spencer, Joe Harris, and Jared Allen off the bench. That's some good players.
Oh, man. That's like some Los Angeles Clippers sort of ish, bringing like, Montrezl Harrell, Lou Williams, and, all there, and, JaMychal Green off the bench. I think our bench remains a real strength. I think Taurean Prince fits more schematically because he's a more valuable sort of guy in terms of what he can bring as a defender. We know Joe Harris consistently brings effort on that end of the floor. But I think that, because we now have this sort of malleability to play guys in different positions. Taurean Prince might even play a little bit of time at the 4. He's certainly got the sort of physical attributes to do so. I think Prince is a more likely starter, but we could easily see them both start in different sort of iterations, because we know it wasn't necessarily wholly consistent last season with injuries and restings. Joe Harris was a consistent starter, so he has built that sort of rapport with the organization and with Coach Kenny. Taurean Prince is going to have to earn it a little bit, but he has spent his time on Long Island. I think Taurean Prince is a more likely starter. Funnily enough, playing 2K for the first time in quite a while last night, we're at my mate's house. He downloaded the rosters. Taurean Prince is a nice guy to play with, so I'll put that out there too.
Yeah, I got to check out the Nets roster. Obviously, that updated download is pretty cool, where you can play with a new team. And I think with Prince, it makes you actually have a pretty good defensive lineup. Like you said, Joe Harris isn't a terrible defender or anything like that. He puts effort in, but there is some potential for Prince, especially athletically, good wingspan, decent size at that 3 spot. Then you have Rodions. It just seems like there could be a lot of switching and versatility now in the defense that we haven't seen in the past.
Definitely. Speaking of good power forwards, Kevin Durant.
Yeah, I would say he's good.
Yeah, certainly a very capable power forward in his own right. Now, this news was making a little bit of waves, Nick, and we haven't chatted about it yet. So what were your thoughts on the fact that Kevin Durant refused to be traded straight up for D'Angelo Russell and was demanding that first rounder from Golden State in their front office?
I kind of think it's awesome in a way. It's just so crazy. He's that powerful of a player. He's like, nah, I'm not getting straight up trade for D'Lo. You guys need to make this sweetener for the Nets and my new team. Give them a pick, and then I'll be happy. Think some it's a little bit of ego, but then, hey, he leveraged his power, knowing that Golden State was screwed if they didn't do this trade, and the Nets could still sign KD, and they could probably work some other things otherwhere for the other contracts. He got the Nets a pick. There's no guarantee they're going to get that first-round pick because, like we talked about, it's top 20 protected. But, hey, I appreciate it.
Yeah, and this is via Brian Windhorst, who reported it initially. Durant initially bought to being traded for Russell straight up, multiple sources said. He didn't think it was a fair deal, and in the case, the Warriors had to not just satisfy the Nets, but also Durant. Leverage was applied by the player, and Golden State had to include that first-round pick before Durant would sign off. Now, we talked about this initially when the Kevin Durant signing was sort of happening, and when there were a lot of sign-and-trade possibilities, which happened in this offseason, were reported. We're like, why does it make sense for the Nets to just trade D'Angelo Russell to Golden State Warriors, other than if they would get value in return? Because we're getting a better player. We're the ones that are giving you, a guy. We're doing you the service. Now, obviously, it needs to. It's a very it's 1 to 20 protected. So if that doesn't happen, it turns into a second round in 2026. So we're hoping, like we've chatted before, that the Golden State Warriors are a pretty good team next season, and Klay gets back healthy. But from the Kevin Durant side, this kind of makes me love him.
Yeah.
I mean, you sort of said it, Nick. He's just like, really, like D'Angelo Russell. You think it's just me and D'Angelo Russell? We're not doing that straight up trade. No, that ain't happening. 3 plus 5, 3 plus 5, baby. All right, we know what it equals. It equals 7, 11. And in that sort of sense, you respect the fact that Kevin Durant wants to get something back for his new organization as well. So he's becoming a Brooklyn Net through and through. He's like, this isn't fair. I don't want this to happen. I want to get more value for my team in return. And obviously, if it ends up being a 2026 second-round pick, it probably means nothing. Who knows where Golden State and where the Nets will be, in 7 years' time. But if it ends up being a decent pick next year, the class is said to be okay. I'm not 100% sure of that. I'll have to chat to guys like the 2D Monies and Matt Esposito on it. But this just it endears Kevin Durant even more to the fans of Brooklyn, and certainly keeps up the sort of strong-willed persona around the NBA circles as well.
Yeah, I agree. You're pretty much spot on. I think it does say that he's kind of buying to the Nets a little bit more than maybe some people anticipated so fast.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really sort of positive thing. But we'll talk a little bit about Durant's health again. It's going to be a pretty consistent topic until we see him back on the court. And this sort of started initially through First Things First, where Chris Carter appeared. And he was saying, the people that I'm talking to say that in 6.5 months, Kevin Durant will be ready to play at full capacity. The people I trust, who work with the best athletes in the world, that's what they've told me. KD will be ready. Before I get to Jared Dudley's response to that, Nick, what were your thoughts on Chris Carter's comments that he made on Fox Sports?
Chris Carter low-key has some good NBA connects, so I think, you take what he says with a grain of salt because he is on that show. That's just a whole bunch of speculation and wild talk. But we've seen guys, what was it? Wes Matthews, I believe, came back from 6.5 months.
Yep.
Now, other guys like the recent injuries, other than DeMarcus Cousins, who is a huge human, took a long time. Most guys come back around 7 months. So I don't think it's crazy because we talked about it before too. KD is a basketball junkie. He's going to be obsessed. Kenny talked about in his interview on the radio that it's known that he's one of the hardest workers in the NBA. So would not surprise me if he just destroyed his rehab.
Yeah, and I mean, timelines aren't necessarily a thing that the Nets sort of training staff and medical staff buy into. But 6.5 months is, you wouldn't put it past him, in that sort of sense. We look at him as an athlete and the durability he has had. Probably one of, you look at the sort of star players in the NBA outside of LeBron James, you'd probably say Kevin Durant is one of the most durable, healthy stars we've had in the league. You look at all the other sort of superstars, there's all this sort of back-end injury history with them, including Kyrie Irving, Joel Embiid. Probably the one that doesn't stick out is probably Nikola Jokic, but he obviously hasn't had his time in the league yet. Paul George, these sort of guys that have spent, for 8+ seasons in the league. Kawhi Leonard have had some sort of injury histories, have had some sort of large injury, be it a broken leg, be it a quad injury. And the fact that this is Kevin Durant's first one, obviously there was the calf.
He had the broken foot too.
My bad, he did have that as well. But it speaks to him that he's been so durable over this stage. And like you said, you wouldn't put it past a guy like Kevin Durant. And he's going to be certainly engaged, like you sort of said about on the podcast that Kenny was on. We'll get to that a little bit more. I did a bit of a thread on it. But Joe Dudley was responsible. It was pretty interesting. And it's still good to see Joe Dudley still repping the Brooklyn Nets. Brooklyn medical staff. He actually said medial staff.
No, I was waiting for you to make the joke because that was
You got the C, my dude. Come on, duds. You can't. I before E, except after C. Brooklyn medial staff doesn't give timetables. About is more cautious than any other team. They will not let him step on the court until he's 110%. Would be shocked to see him on the court playing before March. We gave our thoughts, Nick. I guess we'll reiterate. Has anything changed? When do you think it'll happen? What do you think about Duds' comments?
Yeah, I think Dudley's correct. That didn't come from the Nets performance team. It probably came from someone Chris Carter knows in terms of other, trainers around the league or medical teams and just giving their opinion. I think there's a possibility he could be ready in 6.5 months or 7 months, but it wouldn't mean that he's going to be on the court right away. KD wants to come on the court and probably be at a very high level. So I think March is still the most realistic date.
Yeah, I think, if anything, I'm on the conservative side of things that if we see him at all, I don't think it's likely to happen. I think we both gave around an 80 to 90% sort of chance that we don't see him. If March is a sort of a positive thing, then yeah, cool. But at the same time, I think Kevin Durant is going to want to be 110% healthier after his previous experiences with Golden State. The medical stuff, as Joe Dudley said, I remember specifically how frustrated we were about Allen Crabbe, and we were chatting about it in person. And at the Atlanta Hawks game and the Pelicans game, where it's like, what has actually happened to Allen Crabbe? They haven't actually told us. They just said like a knee sort of contusion or something, and then there was just no information until like suddenly it's just like, oh yeah, he'll be back next game. I think that from that sort of perspective, we chatted about it a little bit, but the Nets staff in general is going to have to be a little bit more forthright in the information they give to the media because, people might not care about Allen Crabbe and when he gets back, but people care deeply about a guy like Kevin Durant, not just Brooklyn Nets fans, but NBA fans in general, the media alike, are invested into Kevin Durant in ways more than one. So we've sort of seen a little bit of a change of tack from that in terms of Sean Marks and Kenny Atkinson with the likes of this podcast and what they've sort of been talking about with the media, I think.
Yeah, and I think a way they can kind of attack that and still not give out timelines is just give up updates. Like KD is now running or KD is now shooting or something along those lines where they don't have to give out the detail, because I like the aspect of not putting pressure on the players and saying, hey, we expect you to be back in 4 weeks. Now they're feeling some type of stress. You remove that, things go a little bit easier and they might get ahead of schedule. Yeah,
exactly. But we'll wait and see. We'll obviously be watching that very closely on the Buzz. So it'll obviously, and Will Jackson just jumped in 6.5 months apparently from the original injury is January. Don't necessarily see a January return happening, but who knows? Chris Carter could be on the money. I think his sources related to Kawhi Leonard were pretty good. Isn't that the sort of talk?
Yeah, he's trained with Kawhi Leonard in the summer. Like they've had some connection like that. So he's one guy with the Kawhi stuff that you actually could believe. And then, like I mentioned, even if KD was back in hypothetically like the middle of January, I still would expect him to be like training and getting back to his 110% level for a couple weeks.
My bad. 6.5 months from now is January. So December apparently would be the 6.5 months from when he did the injury. So Will's keeping me on my toes, and good man. I deserve that. But we'll change tack a little bit, Nick, because Adrian Dyson's jumped in the chat again. You've been doing some great video stuff from Summer League. I've kept a little bit of an eye on it. What are your thoughts on Nicholas Claxton again? He's been getting plenty of praise from the likes of Coach Kenny and Sean Marks and the like. He looks good in the Summer League so far, says Adrian.
Yeah, I mean, he really does. I mean, obviously, there's some things he needs to work on in terms of some basketball IQ stuff. Really, a lot of it is size, but I think you love the confidence, the ball handling ability, creating contact, understanding what he needs to do. And you mentioned, Kenny was really high on him and said he had a little bit of Chris Bosh in him.
Yeah, I mean, that is, I remember him sort of saying that. It was just like, I don't want to put any pressure on him, but I'm going to compare him to one of the greatest stretch 4-5s in maybe the history of the game and sort of revolutionize the position in that sort of respect. But you look at a Chris Bosh as well. Chris Bosh was never a sort of beefy and sort of chunky, sort of strong guy. Obviously, he had, great strength, but he also had, he was fit, he was long. And I see some skills in him because Chris Bosh is one of the most versatile, big men that we've ever seen. So to have such lofty comparisons, at such an early stage, and to hear the excitement in Coach Kenny's voice on the podcast as well, you could tell that he can't wait to get into the war room with the guy Nicholas Claxton. What has surprised you, Nick, about him? What have you sort of seen that thinks that this comparison is on the money? What have you liked about him? Give me some more thoughts about him, because he seems to me to be the talk of Summer League for the Brooklyn Nets.
He seems to be a little bit more aggressive on the boards than I think we anticipated. He's attacked a little bit more on there. I think I like his ability to kind of like willing to create contact. And then just a couple thoughts on the Bosh comparison, like you said, is one thing that Bosh did extremely well. He had good lower body strength, but his ability to guard multiple positions. You saw the Nets at Summer League at one point. This was for a short segment of the game. They ran out a 1-2-2 zone, and they had Nick Claxton at the top. So they were like, okay, we're going to put Nick Claxton at the top, let him guard guards a little bit. So there's some good length. There's obviously great athleticism. And I just love the ability for such a big guy to be comfortable handling the ball. You see a lot of bigs have the ball in their hands, and they just look uncomfortable. They look like they want to pass that thing right away. Like even a guy like Jared Allen, he doesn't really like to take that many dribbles. Claxton will take it out the perimeter, drive to the lane, and that's something that can really help. One of his most impressive plays was probably faking the dribble handoff and then driving to the paint.
Yeah, I mean, that's the sort of stuff you see from guys like, Ben Simmons and Giannis Antetokounmpo, guys who are sort of the size of Nicholas Claxton, but are just absolute physical and athletic anomalies in the way that they play this game. So it's incredibly exciting. And I think a lot of the skills that you're talking about, mean that, our season preview projections are going to be very interesting in terms of what sort of amount of time could we see him playing. Is he just going to be a backup 5? Is he going to be playing some time at the 4? Because I think that 4 position is still an area where there is some weakness. You look at Rodion's Toyin Prince can play up a little bit. Wilson Chandler at times. Nicholas Claxton, I think the fact that he has this versatility about him and what he has shown at Summer League so far in such a short amount of time, it's really positive. And like I said, I'll repeat it again. We really got to steal with him at Summer League.
Yeah, and it seemed like, the way Kenny and Sean have talked about him, it was a guy that they really wanted, and they were so happy to get him in the second round. And it seems like he's going to be a real steal. And then, like, going through old draft boards of, NBA draft media guys, he was a top 20 pick for most guys' eyes. So it's such a nice thing that he just ended up dropping the 31 for the Nets.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen Jackson Hayes have one of the greatest dunks in Summer League history, and what the Pelicans are doing with their sort of Summer League roster. But Nicholas Claxton's been probably a real bright spot for us, and there's I think a lot of talent in this draft that we've probably overlooked, and especially our guys at OTG Basketball certainly haven't overlooked them. And Dalton gave us a really thorough, in-depth sort of breakdown of Nicholas Claxton when we were chatting with him on the draft pod. I've done a little bit of a video breakdown where I've seen a lot of the skills that he had in college already being replicated at the Summer League. His sort of length defensively, his ability to handle the ball, like all the things that you mentioned, Nick. But we've got a couple more questions in the chat before we get to some other topics. Arthur, should Spencer and Kyrie play on the floor at the same time?
Yeah, I think they definitely will. I think all the guards are going to see minutes together. You'll see some Spencer and Caris. You'll see some Spencer and Kyrie. Last year we saw the different combinations. So why not? And we know they already have a relationship developing.
And in that sort of sense, I think, do you think it'll be, maybe this is a really easy sort of question, but I think it sort of leads to just a bit more analysis from it overall. Do you think that it'll be a more fruitful pairing on the court than we saw from Spencer and D'Angelo Russell?
Yeah, I do. I think there's a better understanding of each other. There's a better relationship, which we'll get to later. And I think just Kyrie understands how to play off ball a little bit better than D'Angelo, and Spencer probably learned a little bit more last season about playing off ball. And he has an understanding of, hey, this is what Kyrie's trying to do. This is what I'm trying to do. And I think something both guys probably do a little bit better than D'Angelo is attack a lot quicker. D'Angelo's, in terms of attacking the rim, he probably needs a pick, or he's going to kind of dance a little bit and then finally get past this guy.
Yeah, I think that as well. You look at Spencer Dinwiddie, I think that he's going to be working on a lot of stuff in the offseason that I think can help him defensively. If he can remain, take a step forward as a defender, he'll see plenty of time on the floor with Kyrie Irving, and that allows, I think, as well, you to play a Caris LeVert at the three, and you have that sort of trio. I think that we saw. It was a thing that we talked about pretty consistently on the Buzz, because they're our three best players, and sort of the how it was sort of working, how it wasn't working. There was plenty of ups and downs throughout the season. Obviously, you look at the preseason games that are coming up, and when we head to Shanghai, and obviously versus Toronto at Barclays as well. The early points of the season. I think there will be some growing pains of sorts. Kyrie Irving. At the same time, I think I think he's going to be. He wants to be where he is. I think he's the best sort of relationship you have with guys on the court is where you want to be there. We saw with Russell Westbrook, he wanted to be in Houston. And while I was incredibly skeptical on the outlet, the fact that he wants to be there means he's going to have to change. And I think he wants to change. So these guys are going to want to succeed together. Taurean Prince is already speaking about championships even without Kevin Durant. But I think that there'll be, with those two on the floor, it could be, those two-man lineups could be as productive as any other two-man lineups that the Nets have next season.
And offensively, there's an argument that the combo of Spencer and Caris are probably the two best offensive guards Kyrie's ever played with. Like, if you really think about it, because in Cleveland, there never was really anybody amazing. They had Dion Waiters, J.R. Smith. Last year, he had Marcus Smart, but Smart's more of a defensive-minded player, more of a hustle guy. Jaylen Brown is kind of a guard, but he doesn't have the playmaking skill set that Spencer and Caris have.
Yeah, I think Jaylen Brown's more of a wing in that sense, and probably similar, like a bigger version of Caris, but has
without the passing
and without the passing. But I think he's a better defender, and I think can guard like bigger guys like LeBron James and those sort of guys. But there's a couple of things I need to get to. Firstly, there's a compliment for you from Insert Call Name. I appreciate the Spider-Man posters and pop vinyls in the background. So nice work to you, Nick Fay.
Appreciate it. I got a Rick and Morty shirt that interests you as well.
Pop Culture King, and plenty of pop culture stuff going to be coming in the offseason for OTG Basketball. Don't worry about that one, including Spider-Man stuff. Crimson Striker, more on the sort of contract stuff, Nick. Should we be worried about KD and Kyrie's opt-out? Scenario one being that they leave. Scenario two, and my more likely fear, they demand a supermax contract to stick around. Obviously, we're forecasting incredibly long into the future, but what were your thoughts on the fact that there's, opt-outs and player options, 3+1s? What did you think in general?
I think that's like literally the most common thing for superstar players to get. So it wasn't that surprising, especially for KD. And I think if the Nets were to win a championship or go to 2 finals or something along those lines, they might be okay overpaying these guys. I don't think you necessarily want to supermax Kyrie, but I think you maybe would be okay supermaxing KD if it turns out he's returning from the injury fine. And, you and I have both talked about, we think he's going to age very gracefully with his skill set. So it is what it is. I mean, we see how the NBA is. Contracts really don't mean anything. So if these guys aren't happy, they could end up demanding a trade 2 or 3 years in. So I think you just take it how it is.
Yeah, I think it's a year by year proposition. You just look at everything that sort of happened in such a short span of time with this organization. 3 years ago, we were in the doldrums and barely a recognizable sort of product. The Brooklyn Buzz wasn't even a thing. I wasn't writing for HB basketball. It was a dark, dark time, my friend. 3 years in the future, the Nets could have a championship. The Nets, things could blow up. Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant could have combustible issues as a relationship and on and off the court. We don't know, and I think it's so hard to forecast that far into the future for Crimson Striker that I can't make an informed sort of judgment until I see what Kyrie is like on the court with DeAndre Jordan, what Kyrie is like on the court with Kevin Durant, what Kevin Durant is like behind the scenes. As a sort of faux assistant coach, as Kenny called him on the podcast. There's so many different things, and it's natural to be hesitant and as a fan and so invested in the organization. But I think that as life lessons, and I was watching. Funnily enough, this is something that I keep with me in general. But Aziz Ansari on his new stand-up special, Iterated as well. You try to just remain present in what's going on, and sort of just enjoy the ride for what it is, because that's certainly what we did last season. It was a really bumpy roller coaster of a journey of the 2018-19 season, but I thoroughly enjoyed every moment, and I reflect upon that season as a Nets fan and as a Buzz co-host, as one of the more fun seasons ever as an NBA fan, and one of the more fun seasons just to analyze as a whole for any sort of team. So looking forward that far ahead, I think it's incredibly difficult. But at the same time, I get the skepticism because we want what's best for this organization.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, you just got to see how it goes out. We haven't seen these guys on the court. It's not like they're re-signed with the Nets. It's something just moving forward, and we'll take it with a grain of salt. And who knows, like, the young guys could really develop nicely where, hey, maybe they understand, Kyrie and KD, when their contracts run up, they don't want the Supermax. They're just happy with X amount of money, and then you're paying bigger money to some of the young guys who turned into stars. Yeah,
that's a very fair call. Will's jumped in again. Any thoughts on the D-Lo unfollowing Spencer on IG?
Yeah, I think that was something we were going to get to. I get it. Like, I get why D'Angelo's upset. He thought maybe Spencer was his boy, and he's out there recruiting Kyrie, knowing that if Kyrie came, that probably meant D'Angelo was leaving. But I think at the end of the day, D'Angelo probably understands that Kyrie's a better player than him. Maybe D'Angelo thinks he can get to that level, but he's not there yet. And if you're getting Kyrie and Kevin Durant, like, no offense to D'Angelo Russell, you could even say this about, like, let's say Damian Lillard was a Nets point guard and they meant they had to get rid of Dame so they could get Kyrie and KD, they would do it.
Yeah, exactly. I think that it shows that behind the scenes that maybe these guys aren't as close as is sort of portrayed about the sort of chemistry within the organization. I think that they're different sort of personalities. We rarely sort of saw Spencer Dinwiddie sort of in sort of pictures with D'Angelo Russell in sort of Instagram stories and that sort of like he was sort of keeping close with Jared Allen, Karis LeVert. D'Angelo Russell has a lot of love for a lot of the guys in the organization, but as well, a lot of his sort of general marketability is about him as an individual superstar. So, it's certainly maybe, the unfollowing on IG, we wouldn't be talking about this in past years, but it's the way of the new NBA with the sort of the social media tendencies and the fact that, Kevin Durant himself, apparently, I don't buy this 100%. Sean Marks didn't even know until the Instagram post from Kevin Durant's business venture. It's just a weird and wacky sort of modern time that we live in.
Yeah, I think Sean Marks was just covering his ass with tampering. But
Yep.
I've kind of mentioned this before. I never felt like the relationship between Spencer and D'Angelo was great. Like, I think they were guys that got along, but I don't think they were best buddies. There was nothing that ever screamed like, hey, we're a great combination. Like, you didn't see them pounding and hugging on the court or anything. Like you mentioned, Spencer had better relationships with other guys on the team. D'Angelo had better relationship with other guys on the team. You never felt like those two were like joined at the hip.
No, and you don't have to be. And it showed that, I think that towards the end of last season is when we really saw that on-court chemistry between those two. It was iterations of like Spencer is better on the court by himself. D'Lo is better on the court by himself. Spencer's closing. But by the end of the season, that's when we saw, the fullest iteration of two of our most talented players together. So even if you're not the closest of friends, you can still make it work on the court. And I think that speaks volumes just around the NBA in general as well. So we should get to plenty of comments, obviously, in the chatter, but they're just some general banter, which I am enjoying watching right now. What do you want to get to next, Nick? Well, should we finish off? No, we'll touch on Sean Livingston being bought out of the Golden State Warriors. Are the Nets any chance to add him as a 15th roster spot?
I would probably say it's unlikely since they re-signed Theo Pinson. I think they envision Theo Pinson maybe being that third-string point guard, or Karis LeVert and him being the third-string point guard. It's a possibility, but he isn't necessarily a great fit in terms of the ability not to shoot. And like Sean Livingston is literally one of my favorite players in the NBA. I loved his season with the Nets, but his skill set has definitely declined over the last 2 seasons. I'm not sure how much he would bring to the team other than a locker room presence.
Yeah, it's funny how this thing comes sort of full, 180 in that sort of sense, and to an extent 360, because he was a former Brooklyn Net, and the breakout season that he had with the team is what got him that contract sort of offer from the Golden State Warriors, and it's what's made him a champ. And he's such a revered teammate. And in terms of a part of the culture of Golden State, and a lot of Golden State Warriors fans are more upset about the fact of losing Andre Iguodala and Sean Livingston than losing Kevin Durant. And I mean, I get it as a sort of fan and being tired and invested to the personality and the grace of these sort of players. But Sean Livingston, it's going to be interesting to see where he does end up, because there was a lot of talk about his contract being used in sort of a sort of trade deal because of the fact that it was non-guaranteed. So I mean, wherever he ends up, whatever he does, he's going to have some great success, because he's endured some real hardships on the court, and to get back to where he is, to become a champ, to become a true one of the better backups in the league, and a real valuable piece in the Golden State Warriors when they're at their best, is just a testament to him.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he signed with the Lakers, because a big reason he had such a great breakout season with the Nets was because of Jason Kidd, and Jason Kidd obviously is with LA now, so that wouldn't surprise me either. Very,
very interesting, my friend. Did you want to finish off on a sort of sentimental note, and we'll reflect on the sort of, now that the roster seems sort of set, we'll reflect on the sort of former Nets of 2018-19?
How about we touch on Kenny's comments?
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. I've got literally have the thread open and I don't even talk about it. All right. So my thread, for those who don't know it, at the JMJBT, had a few comments. We spoke about the Nicholas Claxton sort of comments, but I literally, as I was listening, I was just like taking notes down on my computer. I'm like, all right, copy and paste and let's put this in the thread. The first one, the fact that he was joking about giving an assistant coach's salary to Kevin Durant. What did you think about that one?
I love the fact that during the interview he talked about it, like he really hyped up KD. Like KD, he loved that. If he listens to that, Kyrie and KD love that interview, because all he did is just hype these guys up and talk about how great they are. He did mention he would challenge them, but he talked about Kevin Durant's basketball mind, and I think he's really intrigued to be around a guy like that to kind of get his input and how he could help the other guys in the team.
Yeah, I think that Kevin Durant's going to add so much value to this team. I'm super excited. Maybe not even more excited than Coach Kenny Atkinson, which is really positive, because it shows that a lot of old school sort of coaches would be just like, oh, this is my way. I'm not going to take in the sort of that collaborative sort of nature. But we will get to that sort of thing in terms of relationship with Kyrie and that sort of stuff. One thing that I think went a little bit under the radar, he wants to figure out what this year's team is like, but doesn't expect the team's play to change a hell of a lot. Were you surprised, not surprised about that comment, Nick?
Not really, because I think he has envisioned what he thinks really good basketball is. He did say in a previous interview with Summer League that like sometimes he's just going to give Kyrie the ball and let him do his thing, or KD. But I think like essentially you're swapping Kyrie in for D'Angelo's role last year, and D'Lo had a high usage rate. I think Kyrie would be happy with that, and he probably needs less pick and roll and can do things more on his own. So I think the offense might even be truer to what he envisioned in the first place.
Yeah, I think you make a really fair call. I think that, I think there needs to be obviously some room for change. And I think that Coach Kenny has shown that, in terms of the fact that he's allowed, sort of the individual guys display their talents and their strengths. We saw D'Angelo Russell last season We saw, Spencer Dinwiddie taking these sort of sidestep threes. We saw Karis driving like a madman. So I think a lot of guys are still confident to display that sort of within Coach Kenny's system. And I think Kyrie Irving's skill set just works so perfectly within the offensive scheme that the Nets sort of run. And it's going to benefit him greatly being, the second best three-point shooter as a point guard in the league. And, the pick and roll, he's really nice at sort of utilizing the screens and creating space. His handle is the best in the league, which I think, works so well within a pick and roll offensive system. Defensively, obviously there needs to be room for change and as well, catering to your guys. But I think, like you sort of said, Nick, as long as there's some wiggle room throughout the season, according to the different matchups, I think we've got a pretty sound system in terms of winning basketball.
Yeah, and this is not related to this interview, but Taurean Prince was talking. I can't remember what it was, but he said one of the reasons he was so excited about coming to Brooklyn was the brand of basketball they play and how it allows players to play to their best skill set.
Yeah, and I think that's a really true indication of how excited he is as well. This is a really sort of small one, and it relates to KD again. Hopes to play KD a bit at the 5 and the 1 when he's back and healthy.
I love it. I love crazy lineups. This, oh God, like Kevin Durant at the 5, that is so exciting. Like, there's just so many cool lineups the Nets can have when they have Kevin Durant. It's just like, I just want to go get 2K right now and play and just mess with it. Like, KD can just do so much on the court. It's so incredible.
Yeah, and I think defensively, we saw some real growth from him in Golden State, and hopefully he comes back and he's even fitter because, we can play some really funky lineups with, I think that if you have Kevin Durant at the 5, the lineup of Kyrie Irving, Spencer Dinwiddie, Caris LeVert, Taurean Prince, and Kevin Durant, I think that would make you salivate, Nick.
Yeah, and you can go super length and still have a lot of skills out there. You could go KD, you could go Rodion, so you go Taurean Prince, Caris LeVert, and Spencer Dinwiddie. Now you have nobody under 6'6" on the floor. Or if you want to play one of your other forwards or somebody at let's throw Wilson Chandler out there and Caris LeVert's the point guard. You can play all different types of lineup. The versatility from, obviously KD's not going to be playing early in the season. There's a possibility for later in the year. But this is completely different from last year where there wasn't really an ability to play big lineups or crazy versatile lineups last year other than guard-heavy ones.
And I think that, you look at the two top teams in the NBA, two top teams in the East, right now, the size and versatility that they have in the Bucks and the Sixers is something that the Nets can counter well against. Yeah. And it sort of speaks to what we couldn't do. And Coach Kenny made comment on that in the podcast as well. On the season as a whole, last season, the playoffs, we could have gotten another game. That really frustrated me. I wasn't expecting it to come that quick. It was a Cinderella type of season.
I think he's right. I think we agree they could have probably gotten game 4. And I'm sure he was upset in how the series ended in game 5. So I think there was a possibility to get one more. And he kind of talked about a little bit of the physicality of Philadelphia. Then he took a small shot at Joel Embiid, saying that they weren't too happy with him or some of his antics on the court when Francesca said about Embiid being immature.
Yeah, certainly. But we'll get on to some more stuff that Coach Kenny mentioned. In terms of talking about Kyrie and his personality, we never prejudge guys. He fits perfectly in our system.
I mean, hey, if they prejudged, D'Angelo wouldn't have had a great stint with the Nets.
True.
You know what I mean? All was negative about him. Even some of the stuff about DeMarre Carroll when he left Toronto wasn't necessarily amazing. Worked out fine. So I think the Nets come in, they believe in their culture, they believe in the system from the organization top to bottom, and they let these guys be who they are. They just hold them to a certain standard, and I think that works out fine.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. And in terms of coaching stars, he also mentioned it's the next step in his development as a coach. I think that we spoke about a lot of that in general when in terms of Coach Kenny growing as a coach. We can sort of see him building a culture, building a system. Now, how does he utilize it now that you have superstar talent on your team?
I love the fact that he's self-aware. That's something that's extremely important. And you kind of mentioned earlier with other coaches that would be like, hey, I'm doing things my way, and that's how it is. No, Kenny's a player advocate, and he also is willing to adapt, and he understands, hey, I need to get better at things too. This isn't just about me being some perfect coach. So I love the fact that he's willing to address hey, I'm not perfect, and I need to change my game a little bit when I'm bringing in superstars like Kyrie and KD.
Yeah, and I think that sort of self-awareness is what's got him to where he is now. He knows he's not a perfect player. I think it's incredibly positive attribute to have, and I think it's a necessary attribute to have in any sort of tutoring role and job, coach, player, coach, teacher, mentor, whatever it might be. You need to be able to go, look, these are my strengths, these are my weaknesses, and how can the environment that I'm in, how can the people around me, he's already talking about Kevin Durant influencing him as a coach and Kyrie Irving and his assistants. We know how good the assistants have been for the Brooklyn Nets organization. So really positive from him. We'll get to a couple more though, Nick. Obviously, the big one on Kevin Durant's injury status, the sort of key takeaway from me when he was talking about is that they're still in the evaluation process.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think they're trying to figure it out. They finally have him in their facility so they can run their tests. And we know they do things a little bit outside the box compared to other organizations. So they're going to get the right plan and put KD in the right situation to get him ready to go and close to 100% as possible.
Yeah, I think that, from the takeaway from that Sports Illustrated article, one of the ones that was making the waves, and I'm pretty sure you posted it on your Twitter page at OTG Nick, was when Sean Marks went to his medical staff and they did their research, they did their background, which is you just love to see the thoroughness that this Brooklyn Nets organization puts into their jobs and the passion that they have. And he was just like, okay, who's in? Who wants to do this? Who's all in on acquiring Kevin Durant despite the Achilles? And literally everyone put their hands up. It's another thing that we sort of talked about in relation to Coach Kenny and his collaboration, his self-awareness. Sean Marks is leaning on the people around him. There's a lot of people in the NBA right now that think it's they have all the knowledge, they don't need anyone else around them. That they've got all the answers, and there's a lot of organizations that are being run that way. So to sort of see that, obviously it's a step by step, and to know that the work is being put in. We've said it a million times, and we'll say it again. He's in the best hands, Kevin Durant.
Yeah, and I think you have to realize, if you're a boss or whatever you're managing, you can't be an expert on everything. It's just not possible. So you have to hire people to do their jobs and let them do their jobs, and you have to build trust with them. And I definitely think the medical team has earned the trust of Sean Marks and the entire organization and the fan base too.
Wholeheartedly. The last sort of one, and it's no sort of surprise. He mentioned the fact that when he was talking to Kyrie and KD that winning this season was a big part of their recruitment. Yeah.
Hey, we know it was too, because they battled, they overachieved, but Karis LeVert, who was playing like their best player, went down in November, and they were able to react to that, go on a winning streak and get themselves in a playoff position. And they became a team that no one really wanted to face on a nightly basis because of the way they played basketball and the team unity, and just everything was positive. And I think he hinted at Joe Harris saying hey, coach, this is a small knit league. Guys are hearing what's going on in Brooklyn, and it caught wind, and hey, two of the biggest stars ended up here.
That's it, baby. Crimson Strike, I promised I'd address his comment. Sort of harking back to the Kyrie Irving talk, and we've mentioned this in passing. I don't know if it's on the outlet or on the buzz, but he asks, so MVP season pushed by Kyrie given his bonuses?
Yeah, I mean, it could possibly do it. We talked about it, probably best case would be top 5 unless the Nets just tear it up and a lot of guys have big seasons. They end up with 55 wins or one of the top 2 seeds. And, Kyrie's going to get a lot of credit because he's a new face coming in, and a lot of other names on the roster aren't as notable with KD being out. So if they had a really good season, you could see a lot of credit going to Kyrie and boosting his chances at an MVP shot.
Yeah, I think if the Celtics had had, that little bit more success, and
if the Celtics were what they were supposed to be, he probably would have been top 3.
Yes, and I think that he has a chance to do that again. Just going through the names that you sort of think are likely to be MVP, I think Giannis is the one that stands out the most because he is on a team by himself. Obviously, the depth in Chris Middleton and Bledsoe, but he's going to have another MVP season for the Bucks to get back to the finals. Whereas this sort of the duo nature of the league, the sort of partnerships that have been created, I think takes away the sort of MVP narrative to an extent from this guy, from these sort of guys. You've got 2 MVP candidates on the Lakers with AD and LeBron. Who out of those 2 do you think wins it more? I mean, that's probably more of a chat for the outlet. And the same thing in Houston now. James Harden was an MVP candidate, but I think his candidacy and his narrative for that takes a step back, adding in the Russell Westbrook, because he's not going to be probably the dominant force that he was. And there's obviously a heap of other guys, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, Joel Embiid if he remains healthy. I think Kyrie's actually a real chance, very sneakily. And, I've got an idea that I'll chat to you about after the pod for OGD basketball related to MVPs. But another question before we reflect on the former Nets, Nick. Adrian Dizon, Nets finishing third in the East behind Bucks and Sixers, ?
I don't think it's out of the realm of possibilities. Obviously, a lot of that would be the young guys taking a jump, but I think they're in a pretty similar area of Boston and Indiana. The Pacers are waiting on Oladipo to come back, and Boston obviously lost Kyrie. They replaced him with Kemba, but I think losing Al Horford is going to impact them way more than people are anticipating.
Yeah, and we've got a great piece by Matt Esposito on OGDBasketball.com that sort of delves into that. I think the Nets are in that sort of second bracket for that third spot. And I think you might be going under the radar a little bit. And we've got some Pacers fans, obviously, insert Cool Name, who's been on the live show a little bit. The Pacers, I think, are a decent chance of that third spot again, despite obviously that relies on Victor Oladipo's health. But for me, it's Boston, and I think Toronto have a shot too. We saw how. But look, I'm basing this purely off the fact that last season when they played without Kawhi Leonard, they were an incredibly successful basketball team. If Pascal Siakam can take another step forward, who knows? I'm not counting them out.
Danny Green was, though, pretty good for them last year. Like, he wasn't a bad player. I'm not saying he's like a make or break thing, but he's another wing that you lose. I think he shot over 40% last year, solid vet. And I think Kawhi being out, other guys stepped up, but those games where Kawhi played, the load got a lot easier.
Yeah. Obviously there's only the top two are almost set in stone. Obviously, anything can happen in this league, so who knows what can happen with any of the teams we've talked about. But the Nets are in a battle. We've got to make the playoffs first. Obviously, we've got a guy like Kyrie Irving, and we made the 6th seed last season. You expect us to take a jump. I was, again, skeptical in sort of previewing pods if we would add Kyrie, how much better we get. But we've added a lot of other pieces too. So a lot has to go well, as Crimson Striker has said. But do we want to reflect on some of the former Nets, my dude?
Yeah, let's do it. All
right, let's start with DeMarre Carroll. What did he bring to the organization? What are some fond memories you have of Mr. DMC Swag Daddy?
DeMarre was arguably one of the biggest pieces in terms of culture change because he was a vet that came in and knew what Kenny wanted and knew how to play the right way and helped set the tone. He also provided leadership for a lot of the young guys from D'Angelo Russell, Karis LeVert, to even Spencer Dinwiddie and Jared Allen. So DeMarre was huge. The Nets probably would not be in this position without making that trade. Obviously, they got the 1st and 2nd round pick, which turned into Musa and Rodions, but his culture impact was huge. Obviously, last season, his shot against Cleveland was big. And then, he had some big games against Memphis, which I think we talked about in the season review.
Yeah, I think the thing that sticks out for me from DeMarre Carroll, obviously, is just the locker room presence, is the relationship that he built with D'Angelo Russell. We would not see D'Angelo Russell, the all-star, D'Angelo Russell, the borderline sort of superstar, one of the upcoming guards of the league, without DeMarre Carroll.
Even D'Angelo the leader.
Yep. D'Angelo the leader with the sort of, mentorship that he got from DeMarre Carroll. He challenged him, he nurtured him. So I think that's what really sticks out for me from DeMarre Carroll. And obviously just being probably the steadiest guy on the Nets roster for so long. When you need a bucket, when you need a defensive play, DeMarre was there. So, but we'll move on to another vet, and our boy that we mentioned earlier in the pod, Jared Dudley. Is it Ben Simmons, Nick? Is that the moment that we all remember? The Night King himself?
Yeah, I think that's what you remember. You remember that situation. I think I don't even remember the Ben Simmons. I remember him defending Jared Allen. When Joel Embiid hit him with the second, hard foul and he came through and shoved him. I appreciate that, and he stuck up for the Nets. He was fired up, and obviously he's another guy that helped culture. They don't have him last year. There's a chance that they don't have that players meeting and they don't turn around the season. So Dudley's locker room presence was huge. I think it'll be huge for the Lakers this year too.
Yeah, Jared Dudley is going to be successful in no matter what he does, media assistant coaching or whatever. He just adds a presence. He knows. We sort of talked about self-awareness when it came to Kenny Atkinson. I think Jared Dudley possesses that in spades. And, I just love what he provided. Now, he gave us just that little bit of a spark, that little bit of an edge that we sort of needed from that veteran sort of presence from Jared Dudley. The Ben Simmons sort of feud was was all over NBA Twitter. It gave us the sort of credence and a bit of exposure that was really fun to sort of talk about. And he did outplay him one game, but obviously Ben Simmons is a much better player. But it was a fun time, and that one season was incredibly memorable with Jared Dudley. But a guy who's a little bit of a longer tenured Brooklyn Net as Rondé Hollis Jefferson.
Yeah, well, obviously we love Rondé. Things didn't really work out for him last year. His skill set didn't necessarily fit the net system. The year prior, he really took a huge step. I think Rondé's still kind of unsure what his role is in this league, but he's a great teammate, great locker room guy. It seemed like everybody was sad that he was gone. We wish him the best, and hopefully he can find a niche in the NBA, which I think he can.
Yeah, and then at the Toronto Raptors, I think he'll be given a role as a sort of defensive sort of specialist. I think he has a skill set that is valuable enough to have a semi-long tenured career in the NBA. He can run the floor, he can play defense. And he was, in terms of that sort of game against Sacramento with that winning play, really sticks out to me. And, some key defensive plays throughout the season against Portland, just reminiscing. And over his entire sort of tenure, he grew with the Brooklyn Nets. He might not be the sort of finished product that we want, and hopefully he turns into that because, he was such a great teammate, such a great presence, and, he sort of grew with sort of, he was the first sort of net there before Sean Marks and Coach Kenny were. So the fact that he's been able to remain and be an important part of the system in a lot of sort of ways, that mid-range sort of shot that he developed, we got nothing but good things to say about the hyphen.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a chance he could be a late bloomer. I think there's still some skills there. It's just like he just needs to slow down. Like that's one of the biggest issues for Rondé. He just needs to chill.
Yeah. And, I think in Toronto, he'll get some time to chill out a little bit and hopefully have some real success there. But Alan Krabnick, Alan Krabnick didn't have some nice things to say on his way out of the Brooklyn Nets organization.
Yeah, it is what it is. Alan Crabb should be extremely thankful for this man named Sean Marks who got him the money bags, because without him, he's probably seeing half as much maybe salary as that. Someone was probably going to offer him a big deal, but nothing that crazy. And Alan Crabb, I get you're upset. At the end of the day, you were never on the court. You couldn't produce because you weren't on the court. And when you were on the court, you were super inconsistent. And the Nets gave him every opportunity to turn into a borderline all-star player, and he just couldn't do it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think health is the number one thing. But at the same time, I think his frustrations lie probably more with the front office than anything else, because we saw, the opening of the school and stuff, his teammates supported him. Yeah. I think Alan Crabb could have added a lot to this Brooklyn Nets organization at his fullest health. It's probably one of the few blips. There's a couple of them on Sean Marks' sort of front office tenure to sort of give that sort of offer sheet out and make that sort of trade for him in the first place. But, AC, I think is going to have, is in a decent situation in Atlanta. I think that, alongside Trae Young and in this sort of system, funnily enough, is Jeremy Lin still in the Atlanta Hawks?
No, I think he got waived or he was traded and he ended up with Toronto, and he's still a free agent right now.
There we go. But it's funny how the sort of Toronto and Atlanta sort of teams and the Nets have been so intertwined of late. Maybe the relationships within organizations sort of remain, which is a good thing. But we'll get to some. I guess we'll sort of combine these sort of two before we get to your boy Ed Davis, Nick, Treveon Graham and Shabazz Napier.
Treveon, we kind of had relatively high hopes that he can kind of produce at a higher level because he had some really good moments a year prior in Charlotte, and talking to Charlotte guys, Dylan Jackson, there was some hope that maybe he could turn into a Trevor Ariza type. Another guy dealt with injuries. 3-point shot was just too bad for him to really see time on the court. Defensively, he was everything as advertised. And then Shabazz, Shabazz was kind of what you expected. He could score. He could put up points. He wasn't necessarily a point guard. He was more of a scoring guard. But he had his moments, and the Nets weren't going to be in the position they were last season without him playing when Spence was out or Karras was out. They needed that extra scoring punch from him. So Shabazz really had an impact last year.
Yeah, Baz really did. He had some big games. I think Milwaukee was one of them.
A couple clutch buckets too.
Yeah, he knows how to get a bucket. He can be a bit of a ball hog of sorts, like he's sort of scared scoring guard more than sort of pure point guard. But, the kid can score. He can hit that 3-point shot. And I think that as in a backup role, I think that, obviously in Minnesota, I think he's going to find some success now with Tyus Jones on his way out, sort of playing behind Jeff Teague, at least for now. I think Shabazz Napier should have a long career in the NBA as a backup guard because a guy that can create his own shot is incredibly valuable in today's day and age. If he's working on stuff in the offseason as well, maybe he proves his game as a passer. But yeah, Treveon Graham, I think, was one of our best defensive players. And, we saw in the preseason some real sort of promise from him as a guy playing the sort of four, and the trust that sort of Coach Kenny had in him at such an early stage. Obviously, it wavered through injuries and through form, and eventually the sort of the tenure, the sort of it sort of broke. The fact that he just wasn't able to perform to the capabilities. He just wasn't able to hit shots. And I think that we saw, I think, one of the few games where he was able to hit a few of those 3-pointers. I think that he has some value. Obviously, being a guy that you look at sort of guys like Michael Kidd-Gilchrist and Stanley Johnson. I think Treveon Graham's in this similar sort of mold, but as a cheaper option. And I think
probably have more faith in him improving as a 3-point shooter than those two.
Because I think he has at least somewhat of the mechanics to do it. So I think teams should be certainly taking a flyer on him. But we'll finish off with big boy Ed Davis, now a Utah Jazz man backing up Rudy Gobert. He is that front court, and they're going to get a lot of rebounds.
Yeah, they really are. It's not going to really change from Gobert going to the bench. They're bringing in the guy who had highest rebound percentage in multiple categories last year. So, I mean, Ed was a guy when we first signed him, we talked about it. We felt like this is a guy we were going to love. He turned out to be that guy. Hustle, energy, toughness, everything that the Nets probably didn't have the year prior. Excellent rebounder, great with the putback slams, and also another great guy in the locker room, a nice mentor for a lot of the young guys. So, it sucks to see Ed go, but obviously, the Nets couldn't afford to keep him.
No, and funnily enough, he gets essentially like a very similar contract to him, and it staggers me that another team wasn't able to offer him that little bit more. Like, you look at what JaVale McGee got, and it's essentially the same as what Ed Davis got. I think JaVale McGee, is a good-ish player, but I think Ed Davis is legitimately good in the skill set that he provides. He's going to fit in perfectly in Utah. And, he provided us with, especially that sort of playoff run when he was healthy. He was super duper crucial in that win against Philadelphia. His physicality, his ability to screen. A lot of players, Joe Harris spoke so highly of him because, he just knew he was going to get a good shot when, the off screen was coming from Ed Davis, one of the best screeners in the NBA. But he was awesome. He was so damn good. But we got one last question, Nick, that I promised I would get to from Saw Click, and we're getting back to Mr. Irving. And I think this is a question we've touched on, but we maybe haven't addressed into the fullest detail. Do you think Kyrie will be a problem in the locker room?
I'm extremely optimistic in general. Like, that's just how I am in life and basketball with the Nets. I really don't think he's going to be like a problem in the locker room. I think there maybe could be an issue here and there, but we talked about it. He wanted to come here. He has a relationship with Spencer. He's developing a relationship with Karis LeVert. Him and KD are great friends. I think there's some ties between him and DeAndre Jordan too. So I'm not that concerned. I think Kyrie heard all the speculation about him being this cancer of the locker room and all the negative thoughts. And I also think his camp heard all those thoughts, and they're going to let Kyrie know that, hey, you need to be a better locker room guy. You need to be a better leadership guy, because you don't want that type of thing in your legacy. Like, hey, this guy was an extremely good player, but he was a terrible teammate. He wants to change that image, and I think he'll try to do that in Brooklyn.
Yeah, and I think there was a comment that I forgot to sort of mention, and it spoke to that. I think we touched on the last buzz. The conflict could come between, more likely, with the coach and the point guard. And Kenny said on the podcast, he can't wait to build that trust. I'll challenge them too, especially in the defensive end. I'm not afraid of the conflict. In fact, I enjoy it at times.
He's sick.
Just a little bit.
But I think every really great coach is a little bit crazy in a way. Like, they do have a little bit of a weirdness to them. So I think it's good. And hey, he's not scared to challenge Kyrie, which is good. And I think Kyrie could end up respecting that, because I'm not saying Brad Stevens is a bad coach. I think he's a really good coach, but I could see him not willing to conflict with guys or being aggressive and kind of being like, hey, Kyrie, I need you to play defense, kind of get after him. He just doesn't have that aggressive type of personality where you listen to Kenny talk for 5 minutes or watch him coach one quarter of a game. You can see that energy and aggressiveness from him.
Yeah, you see Brad Stevens as this isn't a negative sort of connotation. It's just how I interpret him as a bit more of a pacifist.
Yeah.
Whereas we see Coach Kenny sort of, like you said, relishing the conflict and challenging defensively. Funnily enough, I did a little bit of a breakdown on Kyrie's defense on netsrepublic.com. Check it out. Plenty of videos there.
I did not check that out, but how did it look?
Come
I'll
on.
check it out after. You've been
Co-host.
dropping threads like every single day.
That is
I
true.
got a job here, Jack.
I do a lot of work, my dude. I do a lot of work. And, for that, I think that Kyrie really improved it as a defender, obviously under Brad Stevens, and the system really benefited him. Obviously, it's going to be different in Brooklyn. And I think defensively, we do have some misgivings and some holes. But I think Kyrie, as a guy who, can create some strips, can force some steals, I think that he'll be a better defender than D'Angelo Russell. And in that sort of point, that makes us a better defensive team. And I think a lot of the times, D'Angelo Russell was sort of benched for those sort of defensive efforts. And, Kyrie, obviously, he thinks this is his team now, but, the sort of coach-player dynamic is going to be fascinating throughout the season. And I got just a slight suspicion that we'll be chatting about it more than once throughout the season.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone will make a huge deal if you see an incident where Kenny and Kyrie are chatting on the sidelines and it's not necessarily in like the most happiest tone. People will be like, oh, look at that. They're already fighting and all this stuff. So there is that extra pressure now having these big stars that's going to come along, where last year people really didn't care about it or would get a quick second on a segment of a sports show. Now you might be the leadoff.
Yeah, the Nets are going to be on Colin Cowherd, funnily enough that they were, and I'm going to be chatting about that on JBT as well. But, guys, there's people that are just joining us right now. Got to hit that subscribe button, get the notifications, and when we're going live.
Yeah, you got to get in here early. We've already been, an hour on the show right now, and sometimes we just randomly drop the shows. Last night for the outlet, we had the random pop-up, the emergency Russell Westbrook. Who knows? Some big stuff could happen for the Nets. So make sure you subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, TGBasketball.com, netsrepublic.com, _radio. And obviously, like I said, make sure you subscribe on YouTube.